I just want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone. I see that participants are still joining, and wow, we have a lot of people joining today, about 90 participants. We all know this is a challenging time and people are busy with their schedules, so we appreciate your time for waiting, even though we are starting a little bit late. We thank you for taking time off your busy schedules to actually join this webinar. So today's webinar is on the road. We are looking at the road to long-acting ARVs. There's been a lot of attention to long-acting prevention tools like lenacapavir. So this webinar is proposed to actually look at what will the long-acting ARVs look like for people. Yes, so I'll go ahead and then introduce myself, and then we'll kickstart the webinar. So my name is Abdul Fattah Salifu. I live and work in Ghana, and I'm currently the alternate board member to United, to the executive board of United, representing the community's delegation. I work with the National Network of People Living with HIV in Ghana, and I'm the executive secretary for Young Health Advocates Ghana as well, which is the youth network of the National Network for People Living with HIV. And I also support the UNA's technical mechanism as a technical expert on community-led responses. And I recently worked on the Young Emerging Leaders Program, mentoring and coaching young emerging leaders to take up leadership roles in the global health responses. Yeah, so the first person on agenda, the first speaker today is Dr. Francois Venter, who will be taking us through the findings and lessons learned from the long-acting PrEP project in South Africa. And Professor Francois Venter is the executive director of WITS Ezinsha at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, where he received his training. His work involves health systems research and clinical trials, most recently involving the antiretrovirals, dolutegravir, tenofovir, alafenamide, cabotegravir, and dolutegravir. Pardon my English. He leads multiple antiretroviral treatment optimization studies and is currently working on new access programs through private pharmacies within South Africa. He's also led patient linkage to care interventions, self-testing projects, as well as most recently on new large-scale primary care delivery platforms addressing hypertension, diabetes, obesity, hyperlipidemia, and HIV. He has also led large PEPFAR-funded HIV programs in South Africa, and he's been like instrumental in the HIV response and other disease areas within the Southern African region. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Professor Francois Venter to take us start with the presentation. Professor Venter, you have
Thanks so much. Can you hear me clearly and can you see my slides, Abdul?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
That's great. I'm going to go very fast because I know the times, and I apologize. I'm going to have to step out of the meeting in about 20 minutes time and just listen on my phone while I'm driving. But I'm going to try and take you through very quickly what's happening in South Africa. And it's a series of sound bites. So if people want details, you could welcome to email me. And I'm going to have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the defunding of PEPFAR programs at the end of the presentation, because it's had such a profound impact on all the countries in the region in terms of service delivery. And it's going to really, it's changed our entire world in rapid fire. These are my various disclosures. Sorry, my slides are not moving. Let me try and see if I can get that to work better. So apologies, everyone. That was not supposed to happen. Let me just see if this works better. Okay. So the first thing about PrEP, I was specifically asked to talk about PrEP, and it's really the most exciting thing that's happening within the HIV arena at the moment. And you've all seen the various studies that have come through thick and fast, particularly around lenacapavir, has been these incredible drugs that have given an excess of 90% efficacy on the background of oral PrEP, the dapivirine ring, and all these other technologies that have been coming along. And these injectable studies are remarkable. And, between cabotegravir, which feels like yesterday's news, but actually, when you think about it, like really hit the news only 5 years ago, as the initial studies came through, but were only published 2 or 3 years ago. But now lenacapavir, they bring all the promise that, we battled with adherence in terms of the oral therapeutics. And you've heard these phrases, they will electrify HIV prevention. It's going to be a game changer. The problem with these drugs is they're not, because they're completely, totally unavailable. And it's been years that they've been unavailable in the case of cabotegravir. As I said, it's been 5 years since the first results were reported for cabotegravir, and I'll show you how little has actually made its way into the market. But there's another Achilles heel, and that's the PrEP delivery system. So I just want to show you the South Africa. Now, I'm showing you South Africa not just because I live here, but because South Africa is often lauded as one of the world success stories around PrEP, because we have so many people on PrEP relative to the rest of the world. But if you look at it, South Africa has had PrEP available for 10 years. And yet we only have just over 1 million people on PrEP in a country which still has incredibly high incidence rates versus 6 million people on treatment. And, after 10 years of our treatment program, we had far more than 1 million people on treatment. So, oral PrEP has really gone into the system very, very slowly. And if you look down there, you'll see we have got less than 1,000 people on the dapivirine ring. And on injectable PrEP, which is entirely cabotegravir, we've got just over 4,000 people, despite it being registered 3 years ago in the country. So we've done very, very badly. And this is the case across the world. And it's not because people are lazy or because they're stupid. It's because PrEP is actually fundamentally a much more complicated thing to get into programs than antiretroviral therapeutics. And we've often approached it as a therapy rather than as a preventative. And it's just been very hard. People have worked actually very hard in South Africa to try and get this out there, but the health system has often been an impediment, and hopefully the injectables will electrify some of this. So some of the data from our operational studies, me and my unit and many other people in the field in Cape Town, KwaZulu-Natal, across the country have been involved in, have looked at the usage of cabotegravir. We've been involved in the registration studies of lenacapavir at various points, particularly Linda Gale and the RHI in Johannesburg have looked at lenacapavir in terms of the purpose studies. But it does not look like South Africa is going to get either drug until 2027 because of all the protracted wranglings with ViiV and with Gilead. Having said that, we do have some data to report back to you. This data has been very limited, mainly because the donations from ViiV are still being given out at very small amounts. We still can't procure cabotegravir for treatment studies, for operational studies in any shape or form. And with the collapse of USAID, a lot of those studies in the rest of Africa have now fallen away. So what we have seen is that these studies have been, we do have some data across multiple communities, and people have taken up oral injectable cabotegravir very readily. That the recruitment studies had no problems getting people into the study. So, people want injectables. I think we all knew that was the case, but these studies confirm the case. Patient satisfaction has been pretty high amongst that. What is interesting is consistently across the studies, about a third of people still want oral PrEP. And the overwhelmingly want the injectable PrEP, but there is still appetite for oral PrEP within this. So just keep that in mind. That does seem to be a case for two forms of PrEP within these studies. And these are the real world operational studies where they've been alpha. And that varies between 40 and 20% want oral PrEP, but it still is, there is a use case for the oral medication. There are cases of people not liking the injections, of the being painful enough to want to go back to oral, but these are actually isolated case reports. So despite pain being at the injection site being reported, it does seem as if that's a relatively small problem. People are quite happy to put up with that. The one thing that is reported repeatedly is the implementation is complicated. This is not something you can just push into a primary healthcare clinic and leave there. You need fairly well-trained staff, you need dedicated staff and administration sites to be able to do this safely and in the way that, and you need tracking systems around the participants within these studies and in these sites. So there's lots of operational work to be done here. One of the studies that is being looked at is for people who become positive on cabotegravir. There's a study called Picasso where we're going to be giving first-line dolutegravir-based therapy to people who failed cabotegravir on the premise that they'll fall out of the program. They'll declare themselves within routine systems that will be giving them dolutegravir. There is a treatment study called CARES. It's been reported in the Lancet HIV, which used rilpivirine, cabotegravir, and not Lancet HIV, I think Lancet Global Health, which used rilpivirine cabotegravir, so injectable treatment in terms of long-actings, which demonstrate, again, very good uptake, very high efficacy rates. So, these drugs work and they work well. In terms of lenacapavir, it has been filed for registration in South Africa. And again, the negotiations are very, very opaque. Gilead and government tells me that they're very irritated with Gilead, that they've not gone forward with the negotiations. I know Gates is in negotiations with them. I don't know where the state of those negotiations are. And it's very frustrating with both ViiV and Gilead to try and get information about them as to where this is sitting. I'm going to just quickly touch on the Trump executive orders because it has changed everything across the board for PrEP and for treatment. This was just something that struck me from the World Health Organization that was released last week, which just showed that already the impact on health systems across Southern Africa is the equivalent of 3/4 of what hit us when COVID hit us at its worst. So just so you understand how severe things are being felt across the HIV programs in our areas. And you can see on the right-hand side why that is the case in other Southern African cases, is the fact that we are so heavily dependent. Our HIV programs, even in South Africa, are heavily dependent on US government funding to support these. But you can see places like Zimbabwe, for instance, is wholly dependent on external funding, and most of the external funding is from the US government. And those systems are pretty much collapsed at the moment. The reports we're getting across the region are that the testing, PrEP, treatment, everything has collapsed there. So talking about, lenacapavir just seems a million miles away from reality, and we're going to need those systems to be repaired before we can get anywhere. Chris Byra put this up at CROI a couple of weeks ago at the San Francisco conference. And one thing I was really struck by is how wholly dependent PrEP is on US government funding and on PEPFAR funding across the region. Not far more so than the treatment programs. At least the treatment programs do take a lot of domestic funding, particularly from South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Kenya. But PrEP is, even in those countries, is almost wholly dependent upon PEPFAR. And with the complete withdrawal of PEPFAR, I think we can see that PrEP is probably going to fall away. So just within my country, we've seen complete collapse of all HIV testing programs outside of hospitals where people test when they're sick. All key population programs have shut, and those were largely driving the PrEP numbers. So for sex workers, LGBTI populations, drug-using populations, gone. The supply lines have been broken, and hopefully they're picking up again at the moment, but there's been significant technical assistance disruption. And pretty much all PrEP has ceased to be delivered outside of the research and implementation sites. And interestingly enough, I'd love to know how much is actually being driven just by the cabotegravir sites that are happening at the moment. And we don't know what's going to happen regarding funding from the Department of Health. It's absolute chaos on the ground. And South Africa is a middle-income country and there's chaos. You can only imagine what's happening in the rest of the region. I don't think places like South Africa are going to be a priority in future, and probably shouldn't be compared to places like Malawi and Zimbabwe, where it's desperately. Also, the politics of Trump South Africa are severe, and I think that the ups and downs of that are just too terrible at the moment. And I think one of the things that I find unbearable is the fact that lenacapavir, the reports that came out in the Lancet, in fact, as we were leaving San Francisco, of once yearly lenacapavir, and it looks as if they can actually turn this into 2 yearly, looking at the PK levels, is that we could have broken the back of the epidemic in the countries which had got to the kind of 95, or that area of air. We could have walked in there and we could have had these mass-based programs around lenacapavir for prevention on the back of successful treatment programs. and finally broken the back of the epidemics in those countries which were finally showing significant incidence reduction. Across Southern Africa, there was a 40% incidence reduction in the last 10 years. And we could have finally got really on top of the epidemic. At this final step forward would have made all the difference. So what to do next? I think certainly for us, it's to continue pressure on the South African government to support its HIV program, which is something we're really battling. It's just this denial that there's a problem at the moment, which is very, very frustrating. And then finally, looking for new mitigation strategies. And I think this is where a lot of creativity around our guidelines, around our modeling, around what drugs we use, about how we use our drugs in our labs is going to need to come to bear. And it's probably going to vary from country to country, but we are going to have to think very creatively about how we deliver key populations, I think, in particular, and how we get PrEP to people far more efficiently than we have in the past. And I hope I didn't take too much time to get there. And it's just to thank my staff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Yep. Thank you so much, Professor Francois Venter. That was really a comprehensive presentation, and drawing from the lessons, I think you've asked everybody and participants on the call to actually advocate for government support, and not just within South Africa, but within our low and middle income countries as well, and then develop mitigation strategies so that
Hi all. It appears that Abdul's screen and voice is frozen. So let's move on to our next presenter. That's Tracy Swan. Tracy Swan is an activist, longtime activist and subject matter expert. So Tracy, over to you to walk us through some of the pipeline. I see your question. If you wouldn't mind using the Q&A function, and then after the presentations, we will also take more questions, and people can will be able to come off mute and ask their questions. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Can everybody see my screen and hear me?
Yes and yes.
So thanks for inviting me. Thanks for attending, everyone. And I'm going to talk about what we have, what we need, and what's coming. I'm not going to say anything about cabotegravir and lenacapavir because Francois has pretty much already covered them. I do want to say a little bit about the current long-acting treatment regimen. This was developed in a very specific population, which was people living with HIV who were virally suppressed, had no history of treatment failure, and no evidence of HIV drug resistance. This is mainly because ripivirine is not really effective for people with a viral load over 100,000 copies. So it's not really suitable for people who haven't started treatment yet because nobody does a viral load before someone starts treatment. You don't want to give someone that might not be effective. So it's given every 2 months as 2 injections into the buttocks. It has to be injected correctly, so it goes into the muscle, and a longer needle is used for people with a BMI over 30. If it's not injected correctly, the drug levels won't be high enough, and people will have experienced treatment failure. And people who have treatment failure on this regimen, although it seems to be around only 1 to 2%, do become resistant to both cabotegravir and ripivirine. Also, ripivirine needs a cold chain. So I actually don't think this is a very exciting regimen, particularly for low and middle income countries. And, you know, my personal belief is where resources are limited, people should really get the best possible drugs that are the safest, the most effective, have the fewest side effects, not this sort of tricky regimen. It is being given to people that it wasn't approved for use in, like people who have some history of treatment failure, but they're getting it once a month, not once every 2 months. And I think the expense, the amount of clinic visits, everything don't really make it a great bet. So what is a great bet? This is my wish list. It may not be entirely practical, but I became an activist because I'm an idealist. We need regimens and drugs that are effective, potent, safe, and tolerable, very few and very mild side effects with a high resistance barrier. And these long-acting ARVs, they should be used for prevention and or for first, second, and third line treatment. You don't really want to start someone on injectables, and if their treatment fails, have them have to take pills. That's not an ideal scenario. It would be great if the dosing was harmonized, meaning all the drugs are dosed on the same schedule, at least every 4 months, preferably longer. No cold chain required. People won't need pre-treatment sensitivity or drug resistance testing. It would be even better if they could be self-administered, not only to decongest clinics, but to give people convenience and privacy. We need regimens that can be used during pregnancy and breastfeeding and by people who have, really common comorbidities and co-infections. And it would be great if there was a long-acting ARV that is also active against hepatitis B. Otherwise, people who are living with HIV and hepatitis B will need to take pills every day for their hepatitis B while they're on a long-acting formulation, which kind of defeats the purpose. Also, it would be great if these drugs have a low propensity for interacting with other drugs like opioid agonist maintenance treatment, gender affirming hormones, TB treatment, hormonal contraceptives, and other very commonly used meds. And we need infant, pediatric, adolescent, and adult formulations. And they should be available in oral, injectable, and implantable formulations. But most of all, they need to be affordable, accessible, and available, particularly in low and middle income countries. So to abruptly change the subject, since I'm a little short on time, there is one other interesting thing in the pipeline, which are broadly neutralizing antibodies. They're more of an immune-based therapy, and they're a very specific type of antibody. They prevent pathogens like COVID-19 or HIV from entering and infecting cells. And it looks like they may also activate the immune system to destroy HIV-infected cells. And bNAbs are being studied as prevention. Not yet, but they're especially interesting for preventing HIV infection in infants. And they're being looked at in HIV treatment and cure strategies. So people living with HIV actually make their own neutralizing antibodies, but HIV mutates really quickly and can become resistant to them. But over years, some people living with HIV will make their own very, very potent bNAbs. And these have neutralized a wide variety of HIV strains in laboratory testing. We need to know more about what they do in humans. So researchers are really tinkering with bNAbs right now to make them more effective and longer lasting. And human trials have reported viral suppression of HIV with and without ARVs. So people living with HIV, some of them were not taking ARVs, and bNAbs virally suppressed them. These trials are in a super limited population that's very safe to study them in, namely people that started HIV treatment really early after they were diagnosed, and have been virally suppressed. We need to see what they'll do in other groups of people. And bNAbs are promising, but they might be expensive to produce initially. The sensitivity to bNAbs, meaning whether they work or not, it may vary across HIV subtypes, and resistance may limit their effectiveness. We just don't know about that yet. So on to the antiretroviral pipeline. Now, this slide covers drugs in phase 2 and phase 3. My last slide will cover phase 1. Phase 1 is the first in human trial, so it will tell you if something's safe, a little bit about dosing, whether it's active, how it moves through the body, etc. But that's about it. Phase 2 really looks more at dosing and treatment strategy, and phase 3 is the last stage before approval, much bigger trials, more diverse in terms of setting. People with different stages of an illness are often let in. So these are the trials that interest me the most for the pipeline. Sometimes phase 1 stuff really excites investors, but it never gets that far. So I tend to focus more on these later stages. In this slide, phase 2 is in orange and phase 3 is in red. So for oral once weekly, we have a combination of a lenacapavir and islatravir tablet, 1 pill once a week. So some of you may remember islatravir. It's a novel class called a nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor, or an NRTTI. Originally, it was studied at a higher dose, which actually caused a decrease in CD4 cells, which is really not what you want from an HIV drug. But that doesn't seem to be a problem at the lower dose that it's being studied at. So it's being studied in virally suppressed people. One thing that came out at CROI is if a person misses a dose, if they take it within 7 days of missing it, the combination should still work. This is sponsored by Gilead, and the reason why that matters is the US government isn't paying for it, so the trial is not, it's very, very unlikely to be canceled. Although what I think will happen is Gilead has a history of developing their own drugs and making it too expensive for someone to use drugs from another company. So we'll look at Gilead's own pipeline. In phase 2, they have an oral form of lenacapavir that becomes active in a person's body with an integrase inhibitor. And that's being studied in the Wonders 1 and 2 trials that Gilead is sponsoring. So that, you know, if this looks really good, they may start promoting this rather than lenacapavir and islatravir. And then Merck has a study of once weekly islatravir with a drug called MK8507, which is an NNRTI, also being studied for PrEP. This is also being studied in virally suppressed people. I think, I'm keeping my eye on Wonders too, because I think we need combinations for treatment naive people, not to just be switching everybody who's virally suppressed, especially in low and middle income settings with funding cuts, when I think things are going to become more complicated and there'll be less funding. So moving on to injectables, ViiV has an interesting trial of long-acting cabotegravir given once a month, plus a bNAb NSL6 given every 4 months called Embrace. And then ViiV has cabotegravir ultra long-acting which is a 4-month formulation. And again, these are pharma-sponsored trials, so they will continue, fortunately. Okay, for injectables every 6 months, the ongoing purpose trials with lenacapavir, the one I really want to highlight is one in people who inject drugs. There's not really a lot of good data on PrEP for people who inject drugs, and I think this trial is super important. It's about halfway enrolled, and I'm very keen to see the data from that. And a phase 2 trial of lenacapavir with 2 bNAbs called TAB and SAB for short. And then Gilead has come up with a once yearly, as Francois mentioned, form of lenacapavir, which will be entering a phase 3 trial later this year. So next, taking a look at what's in phase 1, Gilead has a capsid inhibitor and 2 long-acting integrase inhibitors. Those are oral drugs that are long-acting for a month, so it could be once monthly pills. It also has a long-acting injectable form of islatravir that becomes active in the body, given every 3 months in phase 1. Gilead has 2 long-acting injectable integrase inhibitors given every 6 months. ViiV has a 6-monthly long-acting injectable integrase inhibitor and 2 long-acting capsid inhibitors. The dosing schedule is not specified. And remember, these are all in super early phase development, but I wanted to give you the whole sense. And in phase 2, Merck has an NRTTI. It's a long-acting oral drug for PrEP given every month. And TIMAD has 2, it's actually monoclonal antibodies, not BNABs, long-acting injectables. So better things are coming, but it's also who's going to pay for these. I think work to make these widely available and affordable in all low and middle income countries, and to do it fast, not wait for years, is super important. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Swan, I do apologize. I dropped off a second with network issues. And thank you for actually highlighting the landscape of what is already available for us. And I would like to remind participants that you can also submit your questions in the chat, Q&A tab, or better still, you can raise your hand and then we'll call you to actually ask your question. And we'll take just a couple more presentations, then we'll now start the Q&A session where people can actually raise their hands and ask questions. So our next presenter is Tama Pesas. She's the head of strategy at the UNITAID and leading prevention, preparedness, and response. And she'll be leading us on presenting on access and affordability issues with long-acting ARVs. So without much ado, I welcome Ms. Tama. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Abdul. Just can you hear me? Yes. So just to first of all reintroduce him as I'm leading on HIV response, but also on some of the other things on like long-acting and monoclonals in UNITAID. So I'm very in the strategy team. So I'm very happy to be with you today. And I really want to thank the organizers for having, really organized this webinar so much at the core of what UNITAID is looking at. So thank you very much for organizing it. So if we just go to next slide, what we wanted to first of all reflect on is that long-acting has become, as Francois very eloquently said, has become what we say as a game changer, as a really opportunity to maybe advance quicker, faster, and for all in HIV. And we've been looking at the landscape, which continues to evolve. That's positive since 2018, when we started our work in long-acting, also because of the community's ask for it. So we know, anyway, if you can click, please, that, as I said, the landscape continues to evolve, and we will come back to the potential impact on innovation with the current context. But for the moment, and please click again, we are still seeing, click again, new things that are very promising and have been described by the previous speakers that could actually really be quite a big change in the way we treat HIV or HIV is treated. But we have to consider access from the beginning. This cannot be an afterthought. So this discussion is already, we have to have it as soon as possible for treatment, although most of the focus is now happening in prevention. Very quickly, in the next slide, I just wanted to reflect that and please click all the action items, sorry for that. I just wanted to reflect that the long-acting technologies are also promising in other areas. We are working in UNITAID, for example, across the board in different diseases, from product development efforts with TLD, long-acting, but also with hepatitis, single cure injections, with TB prevention, and also with opioid substitution therapy that was mentioned before by Tracy, to become kind of, tools that can be implemented by countries should the access barriers, of course, be overcome. We are working with a big number in this vast portfolio with a big number of implementers, as you can see in the slide, looking across the value chain from advancing the pipeline to enabling access and accelerating the introduction of those products that actually come out of the pipeline. I will cover today only those for PrEP, but we are working as well in other things. And the next slide is also general, just to remind for those who don't know this tool, or to remind it for those who know, sorry, that we have in LAPAL, which is a long-acting technologies patents and license database that is coordinated by Medicines Patent Pool with Curl, Lip, and iBase. And it's a very resourceful website where you can find information about the IP, the clinical development, where they are on the pipeline, and the regulatory for the long-acting technologies. So I will encourage you to look at that. And now zooming in next slide into what Francois called the elephant in the room. Yes, the whole work that we are doing on access to long-acting and deployment of these tools have radically changed since 24th of January. So the whole landscape has been impacted by those funding cuts, from the manufacturing up to of course, the patient or the persons who need prevention. And I just want as well to bring here this market impact memo we commissioned Chai to do, which is quite a good reflection in terms of the impact across the market in HIV. Because what we see is that, click please, there is concerns at 3 levels. First of all, of course, the direct public health. Because of time, I'm not going to go into it. All of you are aware of that, and PrEP watch as well, as Michelle is saying in the chat. Mr. Warren has a lot of information as well on the direct public health impact. But we are also very worried about the market and access to current tools. So supply delays at country level for sure, but also what I want to discuss today is also the impact on the global market, because the uncertainties on procurement are actually freezing, if you want, this market, and manufacturers of antiretrovirals, for whom, for example, PEPFAR represented 35% of the income, are actually, in a situation which is quite different than they were before January, with a secure market. And that also impact the innovation. With this uncertainty about sustainability, there is an effect on lack of incentive for development of new products. And in addition, of course, countries have more challenges to adopt innovations as they come out of the pipeline. So altogether, the situation is very different than what we had before. Next slide. I'm gonna now focus on the 2 main emerging long-acting antiretrovirals that can be positioned for treatment, although now we are only using them or about to use them for prevention. I'm not going to talk about cabotegravir rilpivirine, which already exists, as Tracy said, because of the access barriers, which are very severe, but also because of maybe the lack, as you said, Tracy, of maybe, let's say, to put it to now, lack of maybe position for the as a first line in the future, which is what we really are going to talk about for the rest of the slides. It's important to know anyway that WHO is preparing new guidance, as you know, on antiretrovirals, and cabo-rilpivirine will be included as an alternative switching option in adults and adolescents already on oral ART regime in some circumstances. But let me concentrate now on CAB. So CAB-LA, we have seen some achievements in the access barriers up to now, but let me focus on actually the ones that are still quite important. First of all, the access price that has decreased, but it still remains very important and over the estimated cost efficacy levels, for example, in countries like South Africa. And this price is only available for a set of countries, mostly sub-Saharan Africa. Other countries are discussing on case-by-case basis. Beef is still the single manufacturer, but as you know, there is a voluntary license with the Medicines Patent Pool, and we are working through the grant with Chai and BITS on a request for proposal to support generics to come to the market at lower cost. There was demand, but this has been quite affected by the cuts, as you saw before as well with Francois. The largest studies, first of all, like Catalyst, have been stopped, but also the procurement by PEPFAR has been stopped now with the current situation in January 2025, which PEPFAR was purchasing 94% of cabotegravir last year. If you click one more, however, we think that it's important to continue working on cabotegravir also because of the potential role in treatment. And even if we know lenacapavir is also being positioned for prevention and probably will take part of that market, of much of that market, because of the easier way of using the product, we do think that there will be the need to look at the access barriers and continue working on them for cabotegravir because of that potential role. Next slide. So moving into lenacapavir, Again, the starting point here was better, was easier to use product, more convenient with twice a year injection for the moment. And compared with others in the past, we are starting by having the information we need, the evidence we need in many different populations, including human and including, and the trials having been done in different diversified geographical settings, we are then able to move quickly with guidance. It's only, however, approved for the moment for experienced patients on antiretrovirals, and we are not clear yet, and we will discuss that in a second, about the collection of evidence for treatment for first line across the board. In terms of regulatory, progress is happening with the different submissions ongoing. I will come to that in a second, and with expedited procedures having been set up by WHO. So next slide, we'll just provide a quick update on that. So indeed, WHO is on track for the guidelines to be launched for lenacapavir in prevention at the conference this summer, the IS conference in July. And in terms of regulatory, again, the expedited processes that have been set up for this product as well have already been kicked off by WHO. At the same time, there is the global approvals that are expected, first of all, by US FDA. The date that they have provided is 19th of June. And then for other global processes in the European Union, like Medicines for All, is expected a little bit after, in September. In that, and there are governments or authorities like the one on South Africa that are also participating, and that can also maybe expedited the SAFRA approval, which has also already been filed for, as well as the Anvisa one, which we will also expect to have soon in Brazil, for example. Next, of course, in the demand and adoption, we are also starting from a place where we can learn from prior oral and long-acting efforts. That was a little bit alluded to by Francois, and we know there is a high, in principle, acceptance. We have actually next been working for years now on these platforms, for example, Pathfinder platforms with South Africa and Brazil in particular, with BITS and Fiotech, to actually see how, as products were emerging from the pipeline, can be integrated as a choice. And that is now ready to adopt lenacapavir for pre-approval studies to continue looking at the best delivery models. We have also, of course, worked with communities all along the way, including as well also demand generation activities that are still to be are very important and will be for treatment as well. Next one. And very quickly, just wanted to indeed restate that this Pathfinder work on prevention will actually help as well in treatment. We have to really establish that bridge as we move forward, but it's a totally different, of course, approach for prevention. Next. In any way, for prevention, still with the current context, the populations at highest risk of HIV will face increasing barriers, and we know we need to roll out PrEP without delay in the most simplified delivery models that meet the needs for all, whether it is oral PrEP or long-acting, and all the populations that can, for which it can have the most impact in the epidemic. So we continue to explore ways to work on that. Next. But coming to barriers, price is, of course, the main barrier that we still have to overcome as of today. For treatment in the north, Gilead price for lenacapavir is around $40,000, but we know, and we know there is an access price that will be coming, but it's not yet been announced, so we don't know the level and we don't know the territory. What we know is through the different studies that we have commissioned is that production is less, can be really produced at a much lower cost, including near parity with oral PrEP, like around $40 if we reach certain volumes. It's important to say or to understand that the production of lenacapavir is easier in terms of formulation than cabotegravir. It is complex in terms of API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, but the injectable itself is easier to produce, and we see a space to actually decrease the price of the cost of goods even in the future. So this is important because, of course, with the current funding situation, the budget, the pocket from countries is getting is shrinking. So this is absolutely a key barrier to overcome. And for that, generics will be key. So next slide. You know that there are licenses not through Medicines Patent Pool, so we don't have transparency in all of the clauses, but in everything. But there are 6 generic licenses that Gilead has done bilateral licenses with. And regarding other comments on the license I wanted to share today is about the indications. First of all, prevention is included pending the approval, but for treatment for the moment is only for the current FDA approval indication. As I said before, that's for heavily treatment experienced adults and is not inclusive of core formulations or core packages. So moving into treatment, we will need to discuss about that. Regarding the licensed territory, as you know, probably some countries are excluded, at least 26 low and middle income countries, and these are areas which include areas with growing epidemics. So that is quite concerning, of course. There are some countries like Brazil, which are advancing and discussing with Gilead about potential maybe for even local production. In Argentina, patent applications have not yet been granted, and that could be as well a possibility. Other discussions are ongoing. Next one, please. So anyway, the situation is quite red in both affordability and supply and delivery, and with the new funding context, that becomes even more red, if you allow me. So with the lack of trust in the market, with the disruption in the services to adopt and uptake the product quickly, there is a lack of opportunities for economies of scale, and probably those of us, like many donors, many partners that we are discussing with, will need to think, we are recalibrating our interventions to see how we can actually boost this and change the situation, even regarding this context in which we are now. So in next slide, just as an example, we are working, as I said, with Bits and Chai into the market together with other donors and in the coalition with many other partners in PrEP. For example, we are in concretely for the work to advance the generic lenacapavir to become available as soon as possible and at the lowest possible price. We have launched an expression of interest and is now under analysis with a request for proposals following that plan for next month to identify the potential investments that will be needed to facilitate that generic development and market entry. This will be in coordination, as I said, with other donors, and hopefully we can also, we can all collectively move quickly. We are also supporting the regulatory pathway and planning for coordinated demand, which is so key now in view of the uncertainty. So I'm almost finishing. Sorry for taking so long, but wanted to highlight before coming to some questions on treatment that for prevention, probably the same can be said for treatment. What we are looking for is two conditions to be met for access. One is a low-cost quality assured product, that's clear, and I have covered that by accelerating the generic pathway, by expanding access to all countries that are excluded from the current plans for generics, and supporting market creation so that can actually help with those volumes that are required for the lowest cost. But also, very importantly, we realize, and that was alluded to as well by Francoise, we realize that specifically as things get more complicated with the funding situation, that we need a cost-effective rollout. That is, to me, the sum of a low-cost delivery model plus ensuring that the populations most affected and that can have a bigger impact in the epidemic curve are also able to access this product. So in co-creation with the countries and in cooperation with all the members of the coalition and the other funders like Steve Gates and Global Fund, we hope that we can advance on that. And finally, I want to end with some questions on what is then that we need to think on as in terms of additional access barriers for antiretrovirals, long-acting antiretrovirals like CAB to be used for treatment. So in that regard, just some questions. First of all, for evidence, we don't have so much clarity on the timelines or certainty on the clinical trials for the long-acting antiretroviral treatment options. Tracy, you did a beautiful review of the landscape, and indeed, you did comment on the different combinations that could be within each company candidates. There are also, we know, combinations that should be studied across different companies like cabotegravir, lenacapavir, and the question about the study that was planned as a phase 3 is still on the air. We are expecting confirmation on whether the trial is to be continuing. And we really will like to see those combinations, a discussion on the preferred combinations so that they can be moved quickly into clinical trials, and including the different populations that need to be included in order to issue guidelines as soon as possible thereafter. In terms of affordability and accessibility, of course, the questions about the voluntary licenses, will they be amenable to using the antiretrovirals for treatment, those that we already see for prevention? Will it be possible to, to have a broader territory of license in that case? Or how are we going to address the issues of those countries not included in the voluntary license? And what could be the role of a medicines patent pool, which could be a for combination treatment and like this one-stop to actually accelerate the combination generic manufacturing? And finally, for the cost efficiency rollout I was referring to in my prior slide, we of course need to think, learning from prevention, from the long-acting prevention, what are the needs for delivering long-acting ART treatment in a cost-effective manner without additional burden to the health system, and in combination with the oral treatment for those who will still remain on that. So this is all that I wanted to share today. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Abdul.
So much, Carmen. I mean, that was very comprehensive, listening to you and your presentation, which highlighted the complexities involved in rolling out long-acting technologies, including PrEP. And it's good that we have the lessons that we can learn from, so that some of the issues that we've experienced with rolling out long-acting prevention tools, we can use that to actually ensure that long-acting ARVs are reaching us sooner and quickly. And thank you for actually drawing our attention to the most critical barrier with access, which is price. If we get the price right, then almost everybody who is affected can afford any medicine at all times. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I would like to remind participants to send in their questions in the Q&A tab. And if you still want to actually raise the question yourself, you can raise your hand when it's time for the Q&A session, which is coming up soon after a couple of our panelists' presentation. So now I'll call on Lupakisio Bukuku, who lives in Tanzania and is a member of the Unity Communist Delegation, to actually give us his personal perspective on long-acting ARVs, what he thinks it is important to have long-acting ARVs for especially young people living with HIV. So, Lupa, if you have already been given speaking opportunity, please, you can come in.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Lupa, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, my name is Lupakiso Bukuku, all the way from Tanzania. I'm affiliated with NYP Plus, and also I'm a member of our United Communist Delegation. As a young person from key population and young people HIV, also who are still in university, I see long-acting ART for both for prevention and for treatment is just not only a medical innovation, but a practical solution to the real-world challenges, especially for the real-world challenges young people face, especially for those such of us who are from key population and low-income setting, where we face a lot of challenges such as stigma. We see long-acting technologies for both PrEP and treatment is a game changer because we see it as will be a relief from daily pills burden. As for us, daily pill burdens make us feel like it's like a constant reminder of status for those who are for treatment, and for those who are using, maybe who want to use the long-acting ART for prevention. For the daily pills, perhaps it looks like it makes a lot of judgment for the rest of the population, like judging your behavior, like you're using that, maybe you're involving yourself in unacceptable behavior, especially in African culture, in Tanzania, in Africa's perspective. So we believe long-acting ART will remove the daily pressure and will give us a room to breathe and focus and just live. Also, we believe that long-acting ART will play a greater role as a protection from stigma. As we understand that in LMICIs, where stigma and discrimination is still widespread, young people from key population, we face a lot of social risk. Apart from this, only social risk, still some of the countries, such as the country which I'm from, still LGBTQIs and a lot of issues regarding key population is not allowed by the law. So sometimes coming front like that is still risk for us. So we believe long-acting ART will offer us with privacy, dignity, especially for those who are using it for prevention, and of course, it will protect us from overall stigma from the society for those who will need to use it for treatment. And also, I see as long-acting ART, our innovation will help the consistent engagement in treatment care. Because here we see many youth disengage from HIV services due to stigma, time constraint, or lack of youth finding care and services. So I believe like injection, which will be just like 2 months or 2 months, every 2 months for a whole year, like will reduce the number of clinic visits, and I hope will improve the retention into care for those who are inconsistent to access to healthcare, and for those who maybe who have challenging geographical position and etc. Apart from us, as we understand that we as young people, we face a lot of issues in regards to mental health. So apart from that's in the normal life, but the issue of HIV being a key a member from key population, it creates more loads on regard to mental health. So I believe still the long-acting ART will not be just a medical, but as we understand that managing a young person with HIV is just as a medical innovation, but also it includes emotional perspective. So we believe that long-acting ART will be great for us, and it will help us to boost with our mental health and to improve our quality of life. And also we believe since the long-acting ART for the treatment will have like reduce the pill burden, maybe reducing the clinical visit and etc. We believe that it could be easy to virus suppress. It could be, I think it will be more effective in virus suppression, and it will help to prevent HIV infection or new HIV infection to the population. So as we understand, still there are some challenges facing this new innovation. We have seen that the US funding cut off, maybe the trade war and etc. But I advise we as together, we should not lose hope. We should fight together for this new innovation to come to us, and yeah, because we believe they are game changers to us. That's all, Abdul, I have.
Thank you so much, Lupa. That was a very good insight from you. And as a young person living with HIV, I also like to share a little bit of my own perspectives. As we all know, the current treatment regimen we have available is the daily pill, which is a TLD, a combination of three of the ARV drugs working together. And with this, people usually find it very challenging to actually take a pill that is very large on a daily basis. And because of this, if somebody, for example, has, let's say, other health conditions, is running diarrhea, is vomiting, the person doesn't have appetite, you can just see the level at which the effects can exacerbate. And because of this, we are really very excited about long-acting technologies, especially lenacapavir, if it is approved for treatment, which will be a game changer. And if it's something that we are going to receive biannually, so you just go to the hospital, you get your injection twice in a year, it reduces the stress and then the cost associated with you actually visiting the hospital for your clinicals, to check your organs to see if they are working properly still, haven't taken the ARVs for so many years. So the long-acting technologies can actually lift us off that burden. And as Lupa already mentioned, the pill burden is a lot, and people usually don't have to carry the pill bottles because of stigma and discrimination that we are still facing. And I think that is something that also has to be addressed. And for long-acting technologies, especially if it is an injectable, I think we'll be able to get away with stigma and discrimination, because you don't necessarily have to carry a pill container or anything that is associating you as somebody who is living with the. And apart from that, I think it will also lift off the burden from the health workers as well. Sometimes you go to the health facilities and there are a long queue of people waiting to receive care and take their ARVs and then go home. And because of the long queues, some people will just say, oh no, I don't have time for this. I can't wait. I don't want anybody else to see me. Then they'll ask questions and they'll end up spreading the news that I have HIV. So with injectables, it actually eliminates that waiting time so that people actually access care readily and readily as and when they have to get the injection. And then the other thing that is very important is achieving viral suppression and actually getting to the undetectable stages where we all now cannot transmit the virus to another person. And that is the gold standard of ART treatment. And I think long-acting injectables will actually help us to achieve that, because the pill burden is sometimes a lot for people. Usually you wake up and then you are thinking, have I taken my pill today? It plays with your mind. Sometimes you take it and you are still wondering if you have taken it or not. And some of us go as far as setting alarms on our phones, telling our friends or colleagues that we know and they are aware that we are living with HIV to actually remind us to take the pills. So if we have injectables, it alleviates all these challenges that we face. And as young people, we don't actually like going to the hospital a lot. And if we have the injectable and then you just have to go to the hospital twice in a year, it actually helps to promote the health outcomes of ART. And the other thing I also want to mention is that we also preach for self-administration. I know it is injectable and it has to be done by somebody who is clinically qualified and certified to do that, but that is something we should also think of because with the pills, it actually gives you the opportunity to take it in your house. So you don't necessarily have to ask the doctor's opinion whenever you have to take the pill. But with the injection, you actually have to go to your hospital for them to actually give it to you. But the challenge with this is nothing compared to the advantages that we are getting with the potential advantages that we may get from long-acting injectables. And I will just represent all young people and people living with HIV on this webinar that we are really anticipating and excited about the opportunity, and we are waiting for it to be introduced so that all our community members will now have access to treatment that is free from stigma and discrimination, free from severe costs that we incur from going to the hospitals. And with this, that is my perspective on long-acting injectables. And now I'll invite Sharona Lynch, who is our next presenter. She is the alternate board member on the NGO delegation to the executive board of Unit 8, and she will be presenting on some of the access and equity issues. Yeah, so Shaman, over to you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. So as Carmen says, it's never too early to start talking about access. And some global health actors are already talking about long-acting ART and access to long-acting ART, fully aware of the pipeline and the research agenda and what needs to happen. But again, it's never too early to start talking about it. However, some global health actors are already putting out a position informally that long-acting ART, because of cost, should be limited to only people with adherence issues. This is a bit flawed for a number of reasons. I can already see Abdul shaking his head at this idea. Abdul and Looper just went through numerous benefits for people living with HIV, and we would lose the opportunity for more people to realize those benefits if it was essentially rationed to only those with adherence issues. Also, it's against equity. It's against the choice agenda. You know, I think AVAC and others have done a tremendous job in highlighting the importance of choice when it comes to prevention and which prevention modality. Likewise, if possible, people should have a choice in terms of what works for them, what fits into their life the most in terms of long-acting or oral when it comes to treatment. Also, I think we should be aware, and others have warned about this, that if long-acting ART, once available, is limited to only those with adherence issues, then we're setting up a perverse incentive where people could essentially intentionally become non-adherent in order to access what they perceive as a better treatment option for them. Also, there's a risk that too many people who could benefit, even under the guise of being, if it's limited to people who are non-adherent, could fall through the cracks. We know that health systems are not as robust as they should be, that monitoring is not as robust as it should be. And we know that support for people living with HIV that are having adherence problems is not as robust as it should be. We also lose the opportunity, if we were to follow this path, to limiting long-acting ART only to those with adherence issues, losing the opportunity to help prevent adherence issues if we were to make long-acting ART available for anyone who wants it. Finally, in terms of market dynamics, and anytime I say that word market dynamics, I want to fall on or the word market, I want to fall on a stake, because we're talking about humans. But we would lose the opportunity, if it was to be rationed, to realize economies of scale and use those economies of scale to secure more affordable prices from more suppliers. If we have a lower volume, that means the negotiating power is lower. If we have a higher volume, that means our negotiating power for a more affordable product is higher. So I don't know if anyone has done the modeling or the math in terms of what does it take, what needs to happen before we can start making the case, once a regimen is available, that long-acting should be available because it benefits the health system in terms of reduced requirements. It benefits people for the reasons that Abdul and Looper stated, and it benefits and reduces the cost per patient, per person per year. So I don't know, Carmen, if you're aware of any modeling, but I would love to know what you think it would take. How low would long-acting ART have to be per year in order to be competitive with first-line ARVs and the cost of first-line ARVs that countries are really paying? Over to you, Carmen.
So I will recognize that I don't have any model to suggest now, but I can follow with some of the links. There have been indeed discussions about that already, and maybe some of the participants can actually help on the literature search. But what I can tell you is that even if we are able to decrease the cost of the combination long-acting antiretrovirals to a level that is not totally in parity with TLD, which, as you know, is the first line for 95% of the people now that needs ART, and it costs only $37 per person per year in the countries that can have access to generics. Therefore, it's a very low bar. Even if we are not at the same level, I think there is an economic argument and an investment case argument to make. And Abdul, you very well describe it. The advantage of the long-acting formulations is that you have a sustained effect. Therefore, once you have used the injection, your levels in the body of the drug will remain the same for the duration of the period. Now, if it's 2 months, or if it's for every 6 months, you will have during the 6 months constant exposure to stable levels of the medicine. That means you will not have risk of transmitting to others. Therefore, the savings that you can calculate are huge, because each new infection, for example, in South Africa, costs $300 per year, because it's not only the $37 of dolutegravir treatment, it's also the administration of it, is the delivery, is the monitoring, is the side effects, etc., etc. So I have heard calculations between 200, 300 per person per year, for example, in South Africa, for each case that is infected. So if you make the numbers, that adds a lot. If by treating one person, you will avoid the partner or multiple partners to be infected, then you can have really there a very good argument. The same as well, of course, will happen with mother-to-child transmission. If you are able to avoid a mother who is infected with HIV, even if she comes late to the antenatal care, and you can, with a long-acting, powerful long-acting, preclude the baby from getting infected, you will really make really long savings, because also those babies will need to live, a normal expectancy life. So the numbers there explode as well, even though the numbers of people or children getting infected are less. So in general, the investment case is there. I don't know exactly what is the level of price that we could think on cost efficacy as of now. But the problem, Sharon, is also, as you know, that even if you have a powerful economic argument, that putting now the money, for example, we have estimated that we might need $2 billion more for prevention now, and we could save 200 billion in some years, from now to so in a decade. But who is going to put that money up front? That's the biggest question. So even if it's the cleverer thing to do, the most smartest thing to do, who is going to put that money up front? That's, to me, the question.
So as always, we're in a situation of pay now or pay more forever, right? Thank you so much, Carmen. I'm going to open the floor up for questions or comments. If you have questions for our panelists, unfortunately, Francois had to go teach a class. Well, unfortunately for us, fortunately for the students. So if you want to use the raise your hand function, and then we will call on you and you can ask your question. Likewise, you can also use the Q&A function. There have already been 7 questions answered. While we're waiting for hands and questions, I would like to get to Chasey Swan and also hear from Carmen about the question of dual use of lenacapavir. This was a question that was put in the Q&A. I see that you responded to it, but I'm assuming that other people have that question as well. So Tracy, can we hear from you? And then Carmen?
Sure. So there's some work on developing a once weekly regimen that's a pill. lenacapavir and islatravir. And I think that could be a great option for some people. The long-acting injectable form for treatment, it's been a struggle because it doesn't have a partner right now. There's no other 6-monthly regimen, right? There's 2 months, but there is not another drug that is on the same dosing schedule. There are some trials looking at lenacapavir as like, I think, second-line, first-line treatment that aren't done yet. We need more data on the long-acting lenacapavir for treatment. Right now, it's only approved as treatment for people with multi-drug resistant HIV who had very few treatment options. So they got the injections and took oral pills every day. And I just wanted to say something, Sharon Ann, about, what you and Carmen were discussing. I think, and Carmen mentioned this, we need to not settle for what I call incestuous combinations, which are trials of drugs that are owned by the same company. When there might be better drugs, one company might have a great drug that could be paired with a drug from another company. We need to be really open-minded about picking the best combinations. And when you're thinking of cost effectiveness, okay, something that has to be given every 6 months or once a year is going to cost the healthcare system so much less than something that needs to be given every 2 months. Something that people can inject themselves with or a pill that they can take themselves is going to decongest health facilities. So we have to be, I think, pretty savvy about which long-acting ARVs are the best, and sort of also demanding to pharma, you're developing these. You have to look at the market and develop what's right for this market, not the pre-funding cuts market. Thank you.
So, Sharon, Abdul? Yeah. So from my side, on the question of the dual use of LEN, both for prevention of acquisition of HIV and for treatment for those who have already been infected, well, this is not an easy question. I think we have faced that question, for example, with cabotegravir, because it's the same class as dolutegravir, the main component of the current first-line treatment. So cabotegravir, having been proposed and used recently for prevention, is the same class and have cross-resistance possibility for cross-resistance with dolutegravir. Also, cabotegravir has a very long tail of like 18 months, which means that even if you stop taking cabotegravir and you remain at risk of infection, you can get actually infected because you will have a not sufficient protective drug, but you will still have some drug. So you are helping on resistance creation for the virus, as you might know. That problem, I don't see that so flagrant with lenacapavir, which is another class different than dolutegravir. But that's if we keep dolutegravir as the first line. I think, as we are discussing today, we are thinking on adding lenacapavir as well, for treatment. So therefore, you will have it in both treatment and prevention. There have been some breakthrough infections on one of the clinical trials on lenacapavir for prevention. So there is a risk. I don't think it's exempted of the risk, but I think we could, and I in the discussions, I mean, the WHO on the guidelines, etc., they are taking into account all that. There is going to be a CADO as well, which is this meeting or this conference on drug antiretroviral drug optimization happening at the end of the year. I'm sure these discussions of what is the best regime in, and combinations for those who infected and those who are not infected will take place. And I think there are ways to go about it. Anyway, the pipeline is converging. As I was saying before, that's good for the market because we will see a higher size. Therefore, we can maybe reach more economies of scale. But of course, this is the trade-off. Over.
Thank you so much, Carmen. Would like to open the floor now to others. If you have comments or questions, you can raise your hand. Thank you all for using the question and answer box. That it's been quite robust, and reading both the questions and answers are quite interesting. But if you also have another question you would like to ask more, Brooke, why don't you come off mute, or Cassidy, if you can select Brooke, then we'll pick Brooke, then Mark, then Abdul. Brooke, please go ahead.
So long acting is incredibly important, and yet communities don't know much about it yet. They know about injections for certain conditions. They know about certainly, and to some extent, vaccinations. But this is kind of a unique use for prevention that's like vaccines. For treatments, it's a little bit different from people have done before. So I wonder what you think the best plans are for raising community and individual awareness, kind of the health literacy side of long-acting products, both for prevention and treatment. And who's going to, it's incredibly important for countries to support that and for our community to do it. And for UnitAid does try to support it, but let's hear more about that.
Great, thanks, Brooke, for that question. Abdul, I'm going to put that question to you and give you a moment to think about it. And in the meantime, let's go to Mark Milano. Hi, Mark. If you're speaking, you're still on mute.
I see it was a pop-up. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
I work with a lot of non-HIV activists, and I just want to be absolutely clear on the current state of PEPFAR based on the first presentation, because we got conflicting reports that it was blocked and then it was shielded from those blocks. What's the situation on the ground now? Is PEPFAR completely stopped, or are we worried it's going to stop? What's actually happening on the ground with PEPFAR? That's I want to bring that back to other activists.
Great, we'll take that question, Swan, Carmen, or myself. And then finally, Abdul, if we can get your question or comment, please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is Abdul. I'm with NAPLAS Ghana, Ghana Network of Person Living with HIV. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear about this long-acting PrEP and then the prevention too. My question is, whilst waiting for government or donors to support this large-scale production, is there any ways we can make the price more affordable for individuals who want to purchase for themselves? And also, some of the clinical trials, are there opportunity to enable community of persons living with HIV to participate in this clinical trial processes to ensure effective drug production? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Now, back to the other Abdul. So Abdul, your question from Brooke, the need for community and individual awareness is high. How do you think we need to start building this awareness?
Sharon, I don't think that the awareness is at the level that we want it to be for our communities, because if you just gather a lot of community members in one room and you ask about lenacapavir, for example, only a handful will be able to tell you that they've heard of it, maybe in a conference or a call or something like that. So we still need to build the momentum on awareness creation. And what I think is really important is treatment literacy, because we don't want what happened with COVID to happen with long-acting injectables. When we have it for people to actually now use, people kind of have the hesitant to actually take the drug and be associated with different other conditions, or you taking for example, lenacapavir for prevention will actually make you get HIV. So we still need to kind of demystify the myths and then the misconceptions around long-acting injectables. And I think that is very low from our end. So we still need to actually build advocacy around that to increase awareness. So we have to take every opportunity that we get to build this. And we also have to ensure that the community's voices are also on the table when we are making this discussions and decisions on long-acting injectables. We want to see how well we'll accept it, and how well people will adapt to the new form of treatment. And I think it's really something that we have to have a discussion on to see how we will accept it, and not just say it via course and then assume everybody will accept it. Over to you.
Right. I absolutely agree, Abdul, that any community engagement, especially in terms of awareness and literacy, needs to accompany programs. So let's move on to, let's first take, we have a couple of P questions. There's the purchasing, the production, and the PEPFAR. So Tracy, how about you and the personal purchasing question? Can you take that one from Abdul?
Sure. And Abdul, I hope this isn't a disappointing answer. But first, the medicine has to be approved in your country to be able to purchase it. Or sometimes people can import things from other countries. But lenacapavir prevention has not been approved yet by any regulatory authority. That's coming in the next couple months. I think really one of the things that's helped us most as activists is the work of Andrew Hill and his colleagues who analyze how much it actually costs to make generic versions of drugs. When sofosbuvir, the hepatitis C drug, came out, it was $84,000 in the United States for a 3-month treatment course, or $1,000 per pill. And through their work, we found out it cost about $1 to make the pill generically, at a profit to generic companies. So I think we really need to get more of this information out about how much less drugs can be priced at, and to build demand, which is really linked to the question about community education. It has to really be linked to things people can do instead of just saying, hey, there's this great thing, but no one can afford it and no one has it. It's like, hey, there's this great thing, and here are campaigns that you can plug into and work you can do to get it for yourself. So I hope that's not a terrible answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Now over to Carmen. Carmen, if you can talk a bit about UnitAid's work and how it envisions the community aspect, going back to Brooke's question, and if you don't mind addressing the PEPFAR question and the production question. So that's 3 for you. Thank you. And then I know we're going over, thanks for those that are staying on, but we'll close after this set of remarks from Carmen. Over to you, Carmen.
I think I was muted by the organizers. So first of all, on the self-use, it was part of the question from Brooke. So just want to address that part on the self-injection. There is a discussion. It will be ideal for the moment. The candidates we see are too big to be maybe, or the formulations are actually not yet there. There are studies, and we have to check where they are. But they were trying for some of the formulations to look into the possibility of self-injection. We are for the TLD, but there are others like KBLA, the ultra long-acting that was supposed to be subcutaneous is moving into intramuscular probably, so then will be more difficult. And the same for lenacapavir for 6 months. Would be possibly a study, or it's a study for self-injection. The once a year will be too big and will become intramuscular. So it depends a lot on the formulation, but it's something that will be eventually fantastic, of course. And community literacy. In our current grants for prevention, we do have a lot, work with communities. In addition, as you know, we have intellectual property grants with different civil society actors that include as well advocacy and literacy on long-acting. But I totally agree there is the need for more, and we are trying to see how to expand it in the countries that are going to move, and in general, how to continue to support communities into this long-acting for HIV, but also for the other things like harm reduction as well. Then in the PEPFAR coming back, I think what we hear from countries is that they are partially coming back in terms of some of the procurement, some of the logistics. Probably, for example, we are seeing that more for advanced HIV disease, for some of the pediatric work. What is clear, unfortunately, is that prevention will be out. Let me say like that, not that it's been confirmed, but we all fear that prevention will actually not be coming back, even if the program of PEPFAR is fully back, because of the current administration priorities, except for mother-to-child transmission, which will probably be taken back. if PEPFAR is fully funded as we move forward. There are some modeling that was shared before in the chat by Mr. Warren, I think, or others that have been looking at what will happen, for example, in the different scenarios, a full back of PEPFAR, partial, or only limited. And I think those are very interesting discussions to have with each of the governments to see how they could go about these in the three scenarios. Over.
Thank you so much, Carmen. So thank you for everyone that has joined. I just want to note in the chat that Joelle has put a link to a glossary that TAG and the CAB, the Community Advisory Group, has put together. It's an illustrated glossary for long-acting technologies. I also want to say that every registrant will receive the presentations from today, along with a recording of the webinar, including those who couldn't make it, but they're only going to hear that at the end if they listen to the recording. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you so much to the panelists, truly appreciate it. And we look forward to watching this space and working with you all